Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of About Abroad, where it's my job to introduce you to people who have built amazing lives for themselves in various foreign corners of the globe. We're talking with expats and thought leaders about moving abroad, remote work, visas, and all the fun and practical knowledge that you need to know to follow in their footsteps. If you've ever dreamed of making a life for yourself overseas, maybe working remotely or embracing long-term travel, retiring or studying abroad, or even just taking a peek inside life beyond your borders, you've landed in the right place. This episode is brought to you in partnership with my friends over at Kona. Those of you that have been listening to the show for a long time know that I am a huge fan of the remote work movement. However, I also recognize it comes with some challenges. One of those challenges that plagues many remote teams is employee burnout or employee dissatisfaction with their jobs. This is really hard to monitor as a leader when your teammates are not sitting face to face with you in an office anymore. But that's what Kona was built to tackle, and they've done a phenomenal job. The co-founders over there are friends and people who have truly built something to help people and help remote workers more specifically. So I love what they're doing. It makes a huge impact for their customers, and I'm excited to partner with them here. You can find out more and get 15% off your team subscription by going to the link in the show notes and using the code CHASE at checkout. Feel free to ask me any questions. I highly recommend this product and am excited to hear what the About Abroad community thinks. Check out the link in the show notes and use the code CHASE at checkout to get 15% off your subscription. My guest today is my good friend Charles, who joins me from France, but he is originally from New York City, where he had a thriving financial career in Manhattan, but he traded all that in to move over to France, and not to Paris or one of the other major areas in France that you might first think of. He moved to an area called Brittany, which is a beautiful section along the coast and a bit more rural than some of the other spots that might first come to mind. So very interesting change of events for Charles. He has absolutely loved it. His family is thriving, and today he dives into how he made the change, some of the things he had to sacrifice along the way, and some advice and comparisons for those of you maybe also considering a transition to Europe or France or somewhere else abroad. So quite a lot learned in this one. A lot of fun chatting with Charles and hearing about how he is thriving living abroad now. Really enjoyed this, and I hope you guys will as well. Please help me in welcoming Charles to About Abroad. Man, so wait, this is not the first time that we've met in real life. Are we calling this real life? It's a video call. I don't know.
Real life is in the same room, but we haven't met. I don't feel like we've met in the same room. We've definitely hung out virtually before, or met up virtually before, and chatted, but not in the same room, which is kind of weird. It feels like we have, but we haven't.
It's weird. Yeah. I find this I don't know if this happens to you, but this occasionally happens to me where I'm like, I have known, quote unquote, someone for years now. And then we hop on a call like this, or even weirder, we actually meet in real life. And I'm like, is it really the first time we connected, or the second time? And then it's kind of embarrassing. It's like, have we met? Have we not? And what does met mean? I don't even know anymore. Oh man. Well, this is great. I'm glad we finally get a chance to do this. I've been super interested in learning more about your story. And kind of the funny thing is I know just enough to be dangerous. If someone asked me what do you know about Charles? I'd be like, I can tell you. And then I would get about 12 seconds into that story and I'd be like, actually, no, I can't tell you. The guy lives in Brittany in France, and he's very passionate about it. And he's not from there. And then my story stops. So, very excited to learn more about you. I'm also excited to learn more about this part of one of the most beautiful countries in the world. I believe still, as far as I know, the most visited country in the world. And I know you have a lot to share, so should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, man, super excited to be here and chatting with you, man. And we're not in the same room, but it's good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. Well, tell people where you're calling in from today. And obviously that's not where you're from. So maybe let's get a little bit of background on where Charles began.
Yeah, totally. So I'm actually a native New Yorker, born and raised in New York City. And so my connection with Brittany is an interesting one. Like a lot of people from New York, immigrant kid. My parents came from Brittany, France, and I grew up there. But I had the chance to, when I was little, to come on summer vacation. So it was quite a contrast, right? Leaving the big city, we lived in like a small 1-bedroom apartment, all the hustle and bustle of that New York City brings, and then all of a sudden I was transported every summer to Brittany, France, which many people don't know is in Western France. Look at France and you see a peninsula that sticks out. That's Brittany, and was in the countryside, small house where my mother was born, and huge transition from New York City because it was just very country. And I just remember as a kid being allowed to climb trees in Brittany. And that was, if you did that in New York, you were a crazy person. So I had that opportunity of a huge contrast of both places. And then when I started work professionally, I was still coming back, right? I had a lot of family and friends in that region. So, the summer vacations were shorter, but I was still able to come back and keep a link with the region. So, which was very special to me. And then a lot of things happened, obviously, from a career point of view, and love happened. And love was actually a woman from Brittany who was a world traveler herself because she was working in China and then New York. And we met in New York and fell in love and had a baby. And with that, her being 10 years abroad, said, hey, I'd like to go back to Brittany. And so me having only lived in New York City, I was like, well, what about a mid-sized U.S. city like Denver, Austin, or San Diego? And I call that pretty well because this is way back before maybe everyone was moving there. It was back in 2015, right? And moving to Brittany for me meant a pretty big thing because I wouldn't be able to do what I was doing in New York in Brittany. It is a foreign country. I knew the language, in this case French, and but there was a lot of stuff to take care of to make that work.
I imagine one of those things was your career. I mean, I'm assuming something here, but like people that live in New York, even though you were from there, like there's an energy there. There's a focus on, it tends to be a focus on work and career and stuff like that. Was that one of those anchors holding you back?
So I think, when we moved from New York City to Brittany, we had a 6-week-old child. And professionally, there was no way. I was working in finance at the time, and there's really no way that I could do what I was doing in New York in Brittany. So that's kind of a scary prospect. I wasn't, I was in my late 30s when that happened, when we did that. So a lot of people was like, yeah, like in terms of career, don't do that, right? you don't, a newborn, and move to a foreign country where you can't really do what you were doing before. But I think everyone should do that, in fact, right? I think it puts a lot of things in question. You kind of bet on yourself. And one of the first things I did, I didn't want to put too much pressure on myself. So I said, if I had moved to Japan, I would have learned Japanese. So I'm moving to France, Brittany, France, and I already speak French because I'm a bilingual kid. My parents had taught me that. But in Brittany, it's kind of a special region. It's Western France, but it's a Celtic country, same as the Welsh, the Scottish, and the Irish. And in Brittany, there's a Celtic language. So I said, you know what? If you had gone to Japan, you would have learned Japanese. Move to Brittany and learn this endangered language. UNESCO says it's an endangered language, and that's a scary thing. It's spoken mostly by people over 60, and there's immersion schools, so kids under 15. And this language was one that my ancestors spoke, right? My grandparents and everything. So I said, look, don't put this massive pressure on yourself to find a job in 3 weeks when you've moved here. Do something like this, right? And it was just an amazing thing because, number one, I can tell you it was regimented for 6 months, 9 to 5 every day. So 9 to 5 every day, speaking, like hearing a language spoken to you don't understand, gives you a massive headache on a daily basis. But it fires something in your mind, your neurons, how things are connected, and it's super rich. And at one point, I was actually dreaming in Breton language, which was totally crazy, right? And it permitted me a number of things. I think a greater connection maybe to my ancestors, but also a greater connections with the land and the landscapes and the places I was. Because very quickly you realize, gosh, everything has a name and it's named for a reason. People didn't make these things up, right? And when you come to Brittany, you see all these names and you're like, well, what does that mean? That's not French. Oh, it's actually Breton, and it means something. So that's a really awesome thing. Also, what it did is, when we as people, as humans, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. In this case, well, look, this is lasting 6 months. It's 9 to 5. You can't, there is no extra pressure, right? And it puts you in a rhythm, right? When you move to a foreign country, sometimes you're kind of lost, right? You had that old rhythm, and New York City has a certain rhythm. I could tell you if you move to France, it's a little bit different. So this was really great to get into sort of rhythm, and you're waking up every day and you've got something to do, and it's pretty awesome. So for me, it was an awesome experience, and I think anyone that moves to a foreign country should definitely pick up the language. In this case, if you can, pick up a foreign language that is endangered and maybe help save it.
Yeah. I mean, I actually want to spend a little bit of time on this because I'm fascinated. It's hard enough at this age, right? Like, just generally speaking, you're not 8 or 6 learning a language where it's just like a sponge and you absorb it. It's for me at least, it's very challenging. Like, I've learned a couple different like the basics of a couple different language, and I'm conversational, at least in Spanish. And it comes not easily. Like, I have to put a lot of effort into it. And there's a lot of things going on in life. You're a dad, you're an employee, you're a leader, you're a husband, you got a lot of things going on. So to carve out the time to learn a language and then have it be one that you're saying is endangered, is that's an amazing thing to me. Like, you had to really commit to that, and there had to be some vigor there to make that happen, which I think is really impressive.
So one of the things, I think as Americans, we often Americans aren't scared to make fools of themselves, of sorts, and that's a good trait actually when you want to learn a foreign language, because you'll just blurt out whatever you want to say, right? I do find maybe sometimes French people less, they're like, well, I don't speak English very well, so I'm not even going to try. And I think language learning more than anything is hey, share whatever you have, right? And in the case of an endangered language, well, probably you can share more than most people, right? So I think that's a fundamental thing. I'll honestly say I'm terrible at speaking Breton, right? There's a lot, kids who are in immersion schools speak so fast when I listen to them. Older generation didn't learn it in school and have, certain terms that I might not have learned in my 6-month course, and that's totally fine. I think more than anything, it's about a human connection. When you meet someone and you can say, hey, I know this word, or I know this phrase, do you know this? That's really special, right? And especially when something that is endangered, when you can do that, you're creating human connections, and you share those, and people are interested by it. So that's the most important thing. But I can say it's kind of scary, right? Saying, hey, I moved to a foreign country, I've done this. Everyone thought I was crazy. Like, what do you mean you're you're already crazy? You left New York. Why would you do this? You moved to Brittany of all places. You didn't even move to Paris. You're in Brittany. You're in a town with more cows than people, and now you decided that you're going to do 6 months of a endangered language called Breton. You must have fallen off a horse or something. Are you okay? That's the types of messages I got, and I was totally okay. I found it to be an amazing, rich experience that I would recommend to everybody.
Yeah, I mean, so a couple things that jump out to me. One, the language thing is it is such a connector, and I mean that in a pro and a con sort of way, because there are some people who are afraid to put themselves out there a little bit with language, and they will go abroad for the sense of adventure that it gives them, but find that they really lack in the sense of community and connection, because they are afraid to put themselves out there. They're afraid to sound weird. They learn this as they go. And I've met so many people along the way that really struggle with that. Their abroad experience wasn't enjoyable because they had that fear. And then there's other people who say oh, I'm just going to dive right in. I'm going to figure it out. I'm not afraid to be to sound like an infant for a little while, and they make that work. So I think it's worth pointing out that's maybe give yourself some self-analysis there if you're considering this. Are you the type of person who would be very concerned with that? And if so, just recognize it's going to be a a bit of a challenge. But I do think that there's something so rich and connecting about when you can just put yourself out there a little bit. I'm here in Greece right now. People speak an amazing English. Like I don't need to try to speak any Greek, and I don't, fortunately. But just those pleasantries, for example, when I was at the little farmer's market today, picking up fruits and vegetables and stuff. And when I would just say the most basic of things, and probably horrible Greek, it was like the guy's face would light up, like, oh, I can say the equivalent of €3. And they're just like, oh, amazing. And there's an instant connection there that's very real. And it's just through the power of like a couple words. And I think that's a really special thing.
Yeah. People definitely appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, but okay. So I'm very curious about something you mentioned this, but you leave New York and, you've got a career going there in finance. And you're obviously at that point, quote unquote, obviously not taking that with you to Brittany, France. I do wonder if that would be different today, if like on some level, if you could have transferred that. But nonetheless, like there's always that thing, right? Like almost everybody that I talked to that had this opportunity to move abroad or this desire to, they had some kind of like anchor holding them back. And they had to cut ties with that anchor. And it meant taking a big step back, or maybe 2 big steps back sometimes. But ultimately, I meet them 5 years later. I'm, talking with you now years after this decision. And very rarely do people regret that. It seems like that would be the case for you. So I wonder if that's correct, if my assumption there is correct, or if you can like sort of expound upon the cutting of that anchor and making that decision.
Yeah. Change and risk are scary things. And I mean, moving to a foreign country with a 6-week-old child, and not having a job prospect and learning an endangered language is kind of risky. And one of the things that I found, just one of the reasons why we moved was for quality of life, not living in a small apartment with a newborn, but living in a place like close to the sea with nature and environment and with family. And that's just been amazing. But you do have to work, right? You do have to follow your passions and do things. And I'm happy to say I had studied marketing in college, right? And that was something that I wanted to do. And, things happened in, New York City being New York City at that time, finance happened. And I kind of went back to the things that maybe I wanted to do, right? Because, hey, if you're going to be crazy, why don't be all in, right? So I was kind of all in, and my nature is to be kind of very active and dynamic. And all of a sudden, people would come to me and say, hey, Charles, like we know of you because you do all these things to build connections between Brittany and the USA. And I kind of, have a question for you. I need your help. And I'm like, yeah, sure. I'm happy to help. What is it? And they're like, well, I'd love to do more business in the USA. And I don't know how. And I got that question a lot from, people that I was like, hey, this is a pretty smart business person. I don't understand. And when they would tell me, they would say, I want to do business in the US, but I don't know someone in Paris. And I'm like, this is just a confusing, what are they talking about? Why would you need to know someone in Paris to do business in New York or San Francisco? So I got the question a lot and would discuss with them. But very quickly, I realized I didn't want to be like a consultant to help people do business in the US. I just, number one, because a lot of times you tell people something and they just don't do it, but they blame you. So I was like, but I still think there's something to do here. So in the midst of this, 6 months of doing course to learn the language, I'm saying, hey, what can I do to move this along, to make a difference? And that's where, with the nonprofit that I was a president of, Braze America, I said, you know what, there's something to do here. If I'm going to help someone, I prefer to help startups, young companies, young entrepreneurs doing something cool. So I said, hey, I'm going to do a startup contest because I had all these, amazing contacts in New York from what I was doing before. And I said, well, I'm going to do a startup contest and it's going to send 3 or 4 startups to New York City to learn what it means to do business in the US, like for marketing and sales, and meet VCs and, what are the legal aspects they need to think of and all of that. So I said, I'm going to do this. Right. So, okay, I've already been crazy. I've moved to a foreign country with a newborn. I'm now learning an endangered language, and I've added this thing. I'm going to do a startup contest, right? And very quickly, I realized, oh gosh, this is going to cost money, and I don't have a job. And the nonprofit, as a nonprofit indicates, doesn't have any money to pay for this. And I still said, you know what? Let's double down. I mean, triple down now. Let's go all in. So I launched this contest, and honestly, a lot of people say, hey, you're crazy, man. Like, you haven't done this the right way. The way it works in France, you need to go see a politician, ask the politician if you're allowed to do this, and then they give you money, and then you do it. And this is like the reverse. The Americans don't do it this way. They're like, hey, there's a need. We solve the problem by doing it. Where France, it's like, hey, you have to go through these channels. So again, I'm like, oh, I messed up. I didn't do this the right way. And something amazing happened. There was the pain, and I'm saying, hey, I might solve this. And I started getting all this press. I started getting Parisian press, like Les Echos, Les Tribunes, like the Wall Street journals of France, we could say, started writing about this startup contest. And then some sponsors called me and said, hey, we heard about your thing. It looks really cool. Can we sponsor you? And this kind of amazing natural thing happened where, snowball effect, it started getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And, at first people said, hey, this is not going to work out. There's no innovative companies in Brittany. And, first year we had 40 companies try to participate in this. And since then, hundreds of companies have participated. I've sent 15 companies to the USA in this accelerator program. And that's led to me meeting all these people, and at the end, getting job offers from companies that were like, hey, what are you doing now? You need to join our company. You're pretty awesome. And we want you to help us with marketing because you're great at this.
Wow. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, that's a very kind of like a side tangent, but very much so connected to this whole idea of sometimes you just got to leap. You don't know where the path is going to take you. You jumped, you went, you left New York. People told you it was a bad idea, career suicide. You end up in Brittany, France, where maybe for a second you're like, maybe they're right. And then, things unfold. I had a conversation with a friend of mine, who I would also call a mentor, and someone I look up to and respect a lot. And we were talking about some of the different forks in the road we've come to in life. And, sometimes we went left, sometimes we went right, career stuff, life stuff, whatever. And we were looking back, kind of laughingly looking back, what if we had gone that way or this way? And the kind of overall conclusion of that conversation was it didn't really matter. If we went left or right, we would have figured it out. Things would have ended up more or less. We could have ended up in totally different careers or with different people around us, living in different cities. But more or less our standard of living, our level of happiness, the things that really matter would have been more or less the same. We felt, all those paths would have ultimately led to something along those lines, just different ingredients that would have made up more or less the same meal, so to speak. So I think there's something to that. And when I talk with people who are considering this move abroad, there's always these fears. There's always these things holding them back. What if this doesn't work out? Or what if I miss out on this opportunity, that job promotion? It's not the right time to sell my house. We want to have so-and-so around us, a family around us during this stage of our lives or our kids' lives, or whatever. It's yeah, but if you just go, those voids will probably be filled and you'll figure it out as you go. And I keep hearing that throughout the brief conversation we're having about so far about your life.
Yeah. So what's the template to moving abroad? I mean, I think curiosity, I think, is one, that desire, liking change, liking being curious, learning new things on a daily basis, trying new things. I think that's really at the heart of it. I mean, hey, will I miss out on something? Maybe, but imagine all the other things that you might gain, right? And nothing stops you from coming back from where you left, right? So there's a lot of opportunities, more so than before. I do this at a time where remote work is kind of non-existent, and I kind of fall into remote work in 2016 and have been a big advocate of it since then. But I think remote work now offers a lot of opportunities for people to make this jump. That wasn't the case back in 2015 when I did.
Yeah, totally. It's a completely different landscape. I kind of find myself like, I've had people ask me actually, like, are you jealous that like it was really hard for you to make that transition back then, similar time frame, like 2014, 15, remote work on a global scale wasn't really a thing. Like I happened to have been working remotely for a company, but I was like, restricted to the US for sure. And now like we have, these distributed teams spread around the world, and people will say like, man, do you wish that it was that easy for you? I'm like, yeah, for sure. I wish that it was that easy for me back then. But at the same time, like it doesn't make me feel like any animosity or anything. Like I'm happy that this this is an upward trajectory where people are getting more and more opportunities to do this sort of thing. And we can have more and more conversations with people like Charles here who are like getting to experience this and not have to sacrifice their careers. And I think that's very exciting. I mean, that's kind of what motivates me.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're asking me that question as well, I mean, like I discovered proximity bias in 2016, right? The term, which has just gotten popular a few years ago. I think it's trial and error. I'm lucky enough to experience so many different, like very, very corporate environments with very, very corporate meetings where you would walk into a conference room and you'd see empty seats and you're like, well, why isn't, and a lot of people sitting on the, like, or standing and not sitting in those seats. And you're like, why are you not sitting in those seats? Oh, you have to be a director or more to sit in the seat. Well, the seat's empty. Why wouldn't anyone sit there? Right. And dress codes were like, well, you can wear jeans on Friday, like, what's the difference if I wear a jean on Monday? Does it change anything? So we've gone through so much, and I think you appreciate it a lot more now because you're like, gosh, I lived that before, and it helps you be better in your way of working, and also in how you manage people. All those things I think are a resource for me on a daily basis because I've seen something else. I haven't landed in 100% remote work world with all the fancy tools that might exist. I've seen something else, and I think that brings a lot of, number one, appreciation for what we have now today, but also insight on how to help other people be better in their work or how they tackle things on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely, man. We'll be right back to the show after a quick break for a note from our sponsor. Hey guys, so many of you write in asking some form of the question, how can I become a digital nomad or location independent professional? And there are obviously a ton of ways to answer that question. I also don't have all the answers, which is why I'm so excited to be partnering up with my friends over at Noma. And they have created the Nomad Academy, which we are going to be launching here very soon. You can get access to the course with $250 off by using the link in the show notes and entering the code CHASE250 at checkout. This is a course that's going to be taught by some of the leading digital nomads in the world. I can't wait to learn from them myself, and I'm also really excited to be teaching a course there. So if you want to join us, go to the link in the show notes, click on it, and then enter the code CHASE250 at checkout and become that digital nomad and location independent professional that you have always aspired to be. If you've made it this far into the episode and you're still enjoying yourself, then I would love to ask a quick favor. Open up the app that you're using to listen to this podcast and leave a quick review. You can do this in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and really just about any platform that allows podcast listening now. If you can't find that in the interface of the app, then scroll down in the show notes and find ratethispodcast.com/aboutabroad, and you should be able to leave it from there. Thanks so much, guys. We really appreciate it and hope you enjoy the rest of the show. I'm very curious. So you've mentioned, you talk about Brittany, and I think you've already kind of alluded to this. Like this is not the area of France that if somebody's going on their European tour, they're like, I'm hitting London, Paris, Rome, and then I got to get back to work. And they're like, I did Europe last week. And so you see this a lot. Like people come on their tours, they see their specific places, and check them off their list. But what I've really grown to love is like, getting into that second and third tier areas that are outside those major metropolitan areas. In fact, like in Europe now, it's almost, it's almost like suffocating in the major cities where you're just like, you feel like you're at Disney World, and more so than you are like actually visiting a real place. And so I really love getting into the Brittany's of the world, and I imagine many others might as well. So I don't have a ton of experience in Brittany. I passed through there on a traumatic camper van experience, and I broke down a few times in this area, but it's not really worth expounding upon beyond that. So I wonder if, like, I don't know, like a very, very broad, very vague question, but I wonder if you can kind of like paint a picture of Brittany, what you love about it. If there's anything that, you kind of see as a downside, that's fine too, but just kind of want to get like an overview of what Brittany means to you.
Yeah, so Brittany is off the beaten path for sure. I think a lot of tourists will end up in Paris or the south of France, and as they come back to France and they explore other regions, they might end up in Brittany, in this Celtic region that sometimes makes you think that you're in maybe Scotland, Wales, or Ireland. That is surrounded, it's a peninsula, so it's surrounded by the sea, and where, the seafood and fishing and sailing are just totally amazing. And a lot of Parisians come here for that. But there's also all this country and all these legends and this history and this culture, a culture that you're like, where am I? Is this French? And you see traditional Breton dance and traditional Breton singing and musicians and all of that. And you feel like you're in this different place. And there's something special about it, right? It's still preserved. It's still here. But you have to seek it out a little bit. So I think Brittany's one of these tourist spots, or even if you want to live abroad, that you have to seek out and find. And there's something precious there that needs to be preserved. It's definitely not one of those regions where, like Barcelona, where there's like a billion tourists everywhere. It's off the beaten path, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. Do you speak French, so you have an advantage over a lot of people that may also be exploring moving to a place like France. But do you find that are you able to connect with the locals there, or did you find some strong resistance to that early on as a foreigner in a place that I'm assuming, I could be wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong, is not really like heavily populated by a bunch of expats?
Yeah, so moving to France, it's pretty good to speak French if anyone's thinking about doing this. It's not like, I would say, a lot of people have gone to Lisbon or Portugal, and I'm like amazed. I'm like, gosh, they speak English better than people in America, but that's not the case in France most of the time. People do speak English, but they have reservations to do it a lot because they think they're not good at it or whatnot. But I think there's a number of things if you want to do this experience, like you have to embrace French culture and French language and French food. And there's a lot of differences, right? that you come to discover. I think from an administration point of view, people have to really make sure that they do the right thing or understand the process. I was lucky enough to be a French citizen before coming in, but even that was kind of a challenge because I was a French citizen that had never lived in France before. So the administration aspect of that was kind of like a little bit hairy, where they were like, "Oh, well, this is kind of odd. It would have been easier if you weren't French." Almost that's what I was told. So, and also finding a job, because you have to go through these organisms to apply and stuff. And they looked at my resume and they were like, "Oh my gosh, we've never seen a resume like this." Would you? And then immediately they, "Hey, would you be okay to work in a supermarket?" And I'm like, yes, but I feel I can do better. So I think there's like a big disconnect, and you have to kind of embrace that and say, I'm making my own way and I'll figure things out. But I think that matches all countries, right? Things aren't easy. Customer service isn't number one here. Like, the customer is not always right. It's usually the opposite. And you have to kind of giggle and laugh at some of the things and get used to it. But I think when you make that effort, there's great opportunities after.
Yeah. I think it's a funny thing because there's a stereotype with with France in a way, right? Like people, some of the things you just said, like, you know, it's really helpful to speak French in France because people aren't super enthusiastic to speak English. Whereas when you go to Portugal or, you know, I'm here in Greece right now, like people speak English and they don't even seem to expect it. It almost seems weird when you say like, you know, in sort of a sheepish way, like, hey, do you speak English? And they're like, yeah, of course I speak English. Why are you asking me? Like, don't insult me. And when you go to France, it's like, if you start speaking in English, like someone might look at you with a little bit of like offensive, like, well, we're in France, buddy. Like you gotta at least try. But something that I found in my travels through France is that stereotype is the extension of that stereotype is that there's like a rudeness factor or something. And I've often found that is hyper overblown, that I've had like some of my more genuine travel experiences, conversations, even like quote, like small friendships built in France. Like last year, for example, just like the idea that's coming to my mind right now, spent a month in the south of France and on the border of Spain and France, but just in France. And there was just like, there was this gym that I would go to, and the owner of the gym every day after my workout, or every day that I was there, would invite me for a coffee and sit down and we would talk, and he would tell me all about the area. Lots of things, like various things. And there was a language barrier for sure. But I mean, we were speaking in English, but like his, first of all, like he had a coffee machine in the gym, which was like, would be weird for any American. It's a cool experience for me. He's like, oh yeah, we take an espresso, we sit down, we talk, like we relax, you know, we spend 30, 45 minutes just talking. And this was like a very normal thing for him. And I found that like really endearing. Like that doesn't happen elsewhere. I haven't had that experience anywhere else. And then like every week they would host like a little, like a lunch where everybody would bring in sort of like, we would call it like a potluck, where everybody brought in a little item and we shared it. And you know, it is true that like English was spoken very little there. And, but people were very warm, very welcoming, trying to work through that. And so I've had way more of those experiences in France, and then I have the opposite that might resonate more with the stereotype.
Yeah, I mean, so number one thing I would say is France is the number one tourist destination in the world. So they must be doing something right, right? They get the most foreign tourists than any other country, which is pretty amazing. And so if you are a non-French speaker and you want to come visit France, you totally can, and you'll be fine. You know, things will work out for you. If you want to move here and speak zero French, I would say that might be a little tougher. You do want to make that effort. I'm lucky enough to understand those cultural differences from, like, I would say early life as a kid and coming here. But also, you know, from a professional point of view, you know, if you come to a foreign country and you start working, there's a lot of cultural differences in the work world as well. But one that is maybe as a person, when you come to France or you visit France, and you're just walking maybe on a tourist destination, people might say hi to you. Bonjour, bonjour. And it reminds me a little bit when you go in the South or Texas or something, you walk in the street and people are like, hey, y'all. And as a New Yorker at first, I remember going like to Dallas or something and people are like, hey, y'all. I'm like, well, why are they saying hi to me? Right. You know,
and where's the rest of us? It's just me. What's with the plural?
And in France, they'll say hi to you and you say hi back. But a very American thing is you can literally have a full-blown conversation with a random person at any moment, and it's a nice exchange, right? Like, you know, I have an example recently where I was at the airport and I sat down with a sandwich, and this older lady sat next to me and she told me the whole story about where she was going, what she was doing, and it was a nice exchange, right? I would have just probably stared at my phone the whole time. That would probably not happen in France because that small talk, easy thing is, I don't know you, why you're talking to me, what do you want, doesn't happen as much. So they do want to say hi, but it ends there. You need to kind of attain a thing of like, who are you? Okay, I know you. And it's the example where the American is the peach and the French are the coconuts a little bit, right? Type of thing going on. And if you understand that, you maybe understand how things work, and work world's different too. And it's really important to understand those things.
Explain the peach and coconut thing, actually, because I love this analogy, and I imagine some people are like, "Oh, tell me more."
Yeah, I don't know if it's always true. I mean, people say this, but the example is, a peach is, you can bite into it. It's flavorful and it's soft, and that's kind of like the American. You show up to a bar, you're by yourself. You can have a conversation with like 5 people, and it's normal. France, that won't happen, right? Like if you go in a bar on your own and want to join a conversation or a table, people are like, who is that? Why is he jumping into our conversation? And you have to get to know them. But if you're if you get to know them, maybe they're really your friends, right? The exterior is rough, but the inside's the good part. Where the American, the peaches exterior, we've had a great chat, but we're not really friends, and we'll never see each other again, right? And that's the hard part, in the middle. And those, I don't think everyone's like that. I do think that sometimes the French could benefit from being a little bit more peachy, and having, living in the moment and just talking to someone they don't know. But, I think there's interesting things in both. And that's why I like living in sort of in the middle.
Yeah. You're kind of getting the best of the best of both worlds in that regard, right? Because you're not living in the epicenter, like in Paris, for example, or in Nice or Marseille, down in where there's like this epicenter of travelers, people who are living abroad. Like you're sort of, you've come from New York. It's like a very strong dichotomy, right? Like coming from New York to living in Brittany, France. It's 2 different ends of the spectrum in a lot of ways, but you've had like both experiences.
They're both very different,
to say the least, right?
Yeah.
Did you ever have any desire, like you grew up in this? Did you ever have a desire to live in France, like to make it your home at some point, or like did it truly just kind of like happen the way you explained it earlier?
Yeah, I don't know. It was this is maybe an issue for some people. Going on vacation somewhere is very different than living there. And sometimes people are like, oh, I go there every year for a week or 2 weeks. It's just amazing, right? And I think a lot of times those people get surprised, right? I had full knowledge that vacation in Brittany is not living here full time. Full knowledge that people are different. There's cultural differences, and you have to understand them and navigate them and make the best of them. But I always was like, oh yeah, I really enjoy Brittany. I like going there. I like going there on vacation. Moving there and doing all that, leaving everything behind and being a little bit nuts, was not something I was thinking about a lot.
Makes sense. What advice would you give to someone though that like does have this dream? Because we mentioned this before, right? Like France is one of these countries it's the most visited country in the entire world. It's a place that people have dreams of going to. Maybe when I finally go abroad one day, I've got to go to France. It's got a lot to offer in terms of like I don't know that everybody. You might think about France, you think about Paris or something very iconic, but like when you really start picking apart the country, it's like you have a sea on the north side, you have the Mediterranean life on the south, you have one of the most the city of love there in Paris, you have Bordeaux and the wine region, you have the French Alps, which has some of the best like skiing and snowboarding and most amazing scenery in the world. There's a ton packed in to one country, which for someone coming from the US would be like relatively small, right? And there's just so much that you can see, not to mention you're right in the middle of Europe. You can bounce off to 10 other countries in a very short time frame. Also, relatively like safe and stable and all these things. So there's a lot to like. So there's a lot of people listening who are going to have France up there as like one of those places that, oh, if I could move there, I would. And you've actually done that. So what do you say to that person when they ask you that when they present you with that, like, this is something I want to do, do you encourage them to do it? Do you say like, hold your horses. You need to think through a few things. Like, how do you answer that question?
Yeah, I would totally recommend people to do that. I think you have to think about certain things. I mean, again, if you've come here before on vacation and then you want to move here, well, you're not on vacation anymore. You have to work. So I think you have to find adaptable skills. Like, what do you do now or know how to do or would like to do that kind of fits with the economy here and what skills you can bring? Because I can honestly say I meet a ton of people that want to move here. They might be foreigners who want to have a France experience, but I also meet a lot of expats, like French people who have moved abroad, right, to the US or Asia or somewhere, and they want to come back to their region, like a Brittany or something, and it's hard, right? Their CV is like too good almost sometimes, right? It's not adaptable. So I think you have to kind of, I don't want to say reinvent yourself, but you do have to recreate and understand, like, you can't impose your maybe work experiences from the past and kind of like just like automatically have them copy and pasted here. There's a lot of adapting to do. And that first off, you think about like the cultural part, but you have to also think about the work part. So those are all kind of combined. So planning ahead makes sense, and understanding how you fit maybe in a certain region more than another or a certain city. That's really, really important.
Yeah. What about like touching on the work thing real quick? Do you mind me asking, are you self-employed or are you employed by a company, and is that company based there or elsewhere?
Yeah, no. So I've worked in tech and SaaS since 2016. I'm a CMO of a company called Appeasy that's based in Brittany, and just an amazing experience to be able to work in tech in France and not in Paris, right? Working in Brittany in tech, which I've been doing for a number of years. That it's really special, but you have to understand, like, you can't show up with like, hey, I know this and this, and this is how it's going to be. Well, no, this is a different market, and you have to understand how that fits in. So, ideally, a lot of people are looking for full-time jobs, and it's hard to be a consultant or a writer or whatever. But I think there's, with remote work, there's a lot of opportunities to do different things that you weren't able to do before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Do you find the is the environment for, like, from a bureaucratic standpoint, is it fair? Do you find it troubling or challenging? Because the reason I'm asking this question is I've found, as an American living outside of Europe, doing business in America is very easy. It's like the whole system is set up to facilitate entrepreneurship, self-employment, creativity, making business work. And I've found challenges working in countries on other continents. And so I'm curious about that, like specifically in France, how is the business environment? Have you found any challenges in this regard? Or have you said like, oh no, it's actually worked pretty well?
I'll talk for the tech space. There's some interesting things if you're like an American or another country and you want to maybe work in France. There's something called like a French Tech Pass, which is a visa that helps people who would like to work for a French tech company, and makes it easier for that company to hire them. So there's definitely some interesting things there. Also, starting companies, there's a lot of help. There's something called a BPI that helps, starter funding, like we'll say seed rounds and things like that. So there's a lot of opportunities to do things, but France will always be, I think, from an administrative point of view, a little bit more of a challenge than maybe some other countries, but I think they're getting better at it.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Okay, cool. My last question for you is, are there any other geographic spaces in France? Keeping in mind, people are listening. Maybe if they've made it this far, their France is on their radar. That's why they listen to this episode, just to get an idea of where they might want to go. Are there any other areas where, like, if you were like, hey, we're going to pick up and move from Brittany and go somewhere else, that call to you in particular? The answer may be no.
Yeah. So, I mean, France is a country of regions, right? There's like 400 cheeses and a bunch of different wines, and I mentioned Breton language before, but there's actually 70 languages: Basque, Corsican, Alsatian, Occitan. So there's so many different things that you can do and visit. But generally speaking, I would say France is an amazing country if you have legal status. You don't worry about a lot of the things. I was just in the U.S. recently, and just chatting with people. Sometimes people don't go to the doctor because they don't have the right insurance, or they have insurance, but the insurance doesn't cover that. French people are quite lucky. A lot of the medical is covered. All of it is covered if you're sick. If you have some bad luck, there's a lot of help. You lose your job. There's a lot of help there, right? A lot of people in tech have lost their job recently, and they're like, well, I got 5-6 weeks salary. In France, sometimes you're paid a year or 18 months, things like that. It's pretty amazing, and those kind of stressful moments in your life are sometimes reduced by how the French government helps you. But aside from that, I think the quality of life, all those things from the food perspective, a lot of organic food. And we think of those markets going on the Sunday to get your vegetables straight from the farmer. Those are like very, very common things. And again, I was just in the US, and like, you want some organic food, and it's like, oh my gosh, food inflation's insane right now in the US. Comparatively here, it's still affordable, right? That's something that any person on any budget, even like, a low salary in France, gets to eat organic food and very healthy food. And that's something that's special. So I think when we talk about France, we talk about equality, and one of the things I've seen in Brittany, maybe more so than other regions, it's that equality between people, right? Which is something in the USA that we were quite worried about, right? Like the haves and the have-nots, and we talk about the 1%. In Brittany, one of the reasons why the quality of life as a region is so awesome is that there's a lot of equality between people, right? All the kids are going to school, and there's not this challenge of like, hey, this is a way better school and you can afford it because it costs, I don't know, $30,000 or $50,000 and it's a private school. I've been sick and I have time off, right? And there's a lot of vacation days and all those things. So one of the things that's just pretty awesome in France is that quality of life that is just kind of basic and everyone gets to have. I also compare just having a baby, like, with my wife, we had a baby in the US and we had one here, and just the differences of how long she got to stay in the hospital compared to here, which was a lot longer, right? So there's a lot of positives in that, and it seems pretty normal for French people. But if you visit other places, and in this case, the US, and you're like, oh, wow, like this is not normal, right? And this is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's so funny to hear you talk about some of those things, because I just had family visiting here from the US, visiting us here in Europe, and the types of conversations that came up had to do with a lot of the things that you're talking about there: the inequality, the cost of just basic everyday things like schooling, insurance, or healthcare. Of course, like, inflation with fruits and vegetables and basic necessities, but like the equality thing and the effect that has on us, like your nervous system, maybe even, where you're like, I literally don't have to think about those things. Whereas you see, when you reinsert yourself into that world, that like, oh wait, this is something that people are not just like thinking about, they're stressing about like every single day. And maybe more and more so. And after you've been away from that for a while, you forget that is the norm. You take it for granted, I guess, is the thing. And it's nice to be reminded, like, no, don't take that for granted.
I'll give another example, and we haven't talked about remote work or work in general a bit. Maybe we can go on that, but we're at that kind of time of the year in Europe, especially in France, where as an American, you might be confused. I sent an email in late July. I got a response saying, yeah, I'm away from the office. You can email me. I'll email you back in September. This amazing thing where Americans are like, hey, they're out of office is like, Yes, I'm out of the office for surgery, but I'll have limited service today because I'm having the surgery. But I'll be back in the office tomorrow. Right, where like the comparing the two are pretty nuts, and definitely the French are onto something. And there's a lot of jokes in the U.S. about the French take August off, but they might probably have the right idea in doing that, in understanding work-life balance, and everyone gets a certain amount of vacation, and they take every single day. And I compare a lot of times, sometimes when I hear in the U.S., it's like, yeah, I took one day around 4th of July, an extra day, and I'm so refreshed now. There's really no way that you are, man. Like you took 2 days off the whole summer. You're not refreshed. You didn't have a digital detox. And, that leads to so many different things, right? Down the road, and stresses and burnouts and all those things that we read about. Those kind of extra vacation days that are imposed a lot in Europe actually lead to people having better quality of life. So, it is okay to take a few weeks off during the summer. And I think the French are proving that and doing really well.
Yeah. I mean, it's not, they're not hurting in many ways. So would you ever consider going back, or are you a Brittany or for life? Do you think in those kind of like long-term chapters, or is it, the book's still to be written?
No, I think I'm I love America. Don't get me wrong. I'm a native New Yorker, and I always feel like I will be. And total, I think it's more about adventures, right, and different things, and being motivated by things. I think when we had the birth of my children, and this made sense, seeking quality of life. But, is there another adventure that's American? Maybe, who knows? That would be exciting. So I don't limit things as like, black and white, like this is it. I think things evolve. And one of the things that I think everyone is feeling now is like we have, from a career point of view, we have multiple lives, right? Maybe in the past, people worked in the same company for, I don't know, 40 years. And now it's not working for the same company we're talking about. We're talking about doing maybe 4 or 5 different jobs in a career. And those jobs might be in different places, and you can do that because of remote work. So I do see those, at whatever age, right? And I think France has maybe a issue of that. Like we recently, I don't know if you followed, there's been this, a few strikes. Shocking in France. There were a couple of strikes.
First time, huh?
I'm pretty surprised by that. They went on strike, and they moved the retirement age from 62 to 64. And that's one of the things that is always kind of jarring when you go back to the US and you might go into a Starbucks and you're like, I'm pretty sure that person's 80 years old working here, right? Which is so impossible in France for a number of reasons. But one of the things that I do see is those cultural differences around work, where I'm like, well, I think you're missing the point here, because one of the issues in France is, a lot of people, maybe 55, no one wants to hire them. Right. And there's this very kind of set view of work. And it's like, well, you probably are missing the point here. This person has amazing experience. They're 60. You probably should hire them not to do the job that a 25-year-old would do, but maybe have them share their experience. Have them be coaches or teach your managers how to do things. What can they add to your company or to your organization and all those things? I feel like France hasn't totally gotten that. So you don't want to be on the US spectrum where the 80-year-old is like grinding because they don't have any retirement. But you do also say, hey, how can we convert people and have them do new things and different things? And that's something maybe I still think France is missing. Having gotten a lot of those kind of quality of life and early retirement and vacation time right, they, making sure that people do evolve in their careers and have training to be able to do that. I think that's the next step. And that's super important.
And actually, it brings up something that's really interesting there, actually. So the strike thing, the first strike to ever take place in France, it made headlines, being about raising the age for retirement. And the counter argument, I heard this from American friends watching from the outside looking in and kind of laughing at it, thinking it's ridiculous. Like, oh, well, and everybody's saying, well, you got to fund retirement. Everybody, we're getting older and we're living longer. And, it's just basic economics. Like they should just understand that, whatever, like set that to the side. What I find interesting about the whole conversation is that security that you talk about and that you and I both appreciate from having lived in Europe and contrasting that against like the lack of security that we have in the US. The counterpoint to that, like what someone, the devil's advocate would say is like, yeah, but you pay for that. Your taxes are a lot higher. And so you're paying for it one way or the other. And I've done the math, I've done the math, and from what I can see, and I'm getting to the question here for you to see what your thoughts are, but like from what I can see, a lot of times this stuff basically balances out to be fairly equal. Like if you take what I made in the US, the taxes that I paid, the insurance that I was then had to buy on top of that, which is extremely expensive, the student loan debt that I had to take on, XYZ, start stacking that stuff up and then compare it to what I would make in Europe and the taxes I would have to pay. More or less my like fixed costs come out to be pretty much the same. But in one case, I end up with fixed costs that are equal to the other, but I have less stress, less anxiety, less concern and worry. And so that for me is like the big difference. And so I don't know, I'm not sure if you see it any differently, but that's been like my perspective.
I mean, I think we all agree the basic retirement systems need to be funded. We can to ask everybody to work until 75. I mean, I don't know if you look at the U.S. ones, they're not better funded than the European ones, and people are working longer. It's misunderstanding the problem. You can keep on we can talk about this in 5 years in France and saying, hey, we have to go to from 64 to 66 or whatever. It's the same problem that I was just stating before, is that if that 62-year-old can't find a job because they're not hiring 62-year-olds, it's totally irrelevant. They'll be on welfare for more years. It's really understanding and how people in different ages can do and bring value to society in different ways, be it to society in general or in work environments, and really getting the best of people. AI is coming, and they say AI is coming for our jobs. They're coming for tasks that humans probably shouldn't be doing anyway. We're creative, we're special, we're human, and we have to get the best out of humans. And I think that, that 65-year-old might not want to do 5 days a week. They might say, hey, we've got this program, you can work 2 days a week. And they'll like that, right? I hear a lot of retirees are bored. They're like, oh, I'm retired now. I don't know what to do with myself. And I think we have to kind of offer different opportunities for people to add value to organizations, to society, and potentially make that keep on funding the system. I have not heard many people talk about that. So I think we need to, put our heads together.
Yeah, totally. I actually worked on an article for Fast Company about a year or so ago on the like sustainability goals that the UN set and how that connects into remote work. That was the whole like shtick of the story. And long story short, the one of the bullet points that came out of that, or what like part of that research, was how remote work could actually support older people who don't want to go into an office or don't want to have like a full-time career, but want to keep contributing to society, and how that would help on like multiple fronts, economically, from a lifestyle standpoint, all these things. So anyway, there's some cool stuff wrapped up into that conversation that probably doesn't get enough attention, but I'm glad you bring it up here.
Yeah, I think remote work has been this great equalizer to tap into talent anywhere. also tapping into talent anywhere also means tapping talent of any age and any skill. And in the same way that we're potentially, what I love about remote work is people maybe who have a handicap, who would not have been able to go into the office before, will now have a lot more opportunities. And we're seeing that the numbers show that. That's the same thing with someone that's older, right? Like, who wants to do a 45-minute commute? You might be living in a nice house, but I can still contribute. I can still add value. I think we need to tap into that. But so I agree with you.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, I've enjoyed this a lot, Charles. It's good to hear a little bit more about your story, and I want to make sure is there anything else you want to add to the discussion, because I feel like we could keep going for a while, but I mean, I don't know if I missed anything. Please feel free to add it, and also I want to make sure people know where to follow along and connect with you if they're interested in learning more about anything you discussed here. So feel free to toss that in as well.
Yeah, totally. So I think and love the show, and thanks for having me. It's cool to be able to be on and talk about and I think one of the things that I think is important, and listening to a lot of the past episodes and people interested by this, I think the perception of these people that are abroad or are being about abroad. I think about my parents, right, who left Brittany in the 1960s. And when they came to the U.S., they were immigrants. The same person who might leave France now that goes to the U.S., they're expats. They're not immigrants, they're expats. But very surprisingly, people who might be coming to France, they're migrants or refugees or whatever that is. And, recently saw an article in Bloomberg where Americans that were going to Mexico were living now in Mexico were expats, and Mexicans were immigrants. And I think we need to kind of readjust that mindset. Anyone who is thinking about moving abroad, think about who you are and what you are. You're maybe not an expat, right? Like if your ancestors came to the U.S. 100, 150 years ago, they came as immigrants, right? And that mindset is a special one, right? And you think about things differently when you show up as an immigrant. So as much I came here, and I very often say, "What am I?" I'm not really sure what I am. Am I an expat, a refugee, an immigrant? I don't know, but I think that the number one thing is, I want to give back and add value to the place that I am in that moment. And I think any person that does go abroad and is looking for these new challenges and wants to live an adventure, think about what category you want to put yourself in when you show up.
I'm so happy you bring this up. We had a discussion about this internally at Doist recently, because we're a team of 100 people in 35 different countries, and so many of the people living in those 35 different countries are living in a foreign country to their home country, right? Like they're for various reasons. And we had that discussion because some of us are expats, and some of us are immigrants, and some of us are migrants, and how we're labeled in that way is there's a lot attached to that, and it needs to be called out a bit more. And I've felt uncomfortable with the terminology sometimes, but unsure how to change it. And I think the terminology may be less important than actually what you said, I think there, which really resonated with me, was like thinking about how you're going to interact with and immerse yourself into that culture and add value. And if you're doing that, then you're doing it right, irrespective of the label that's put on you. But also labels matter, terminology matters, and we should be cognizant of this. So it's really cool you bring that up.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm glad. Well, what else or what, where should people follow along if they want to connect with you, if they want to learn a little bit more? Any other, any links that we should drop in the show notes? Please list those here. And for those listening, you'll find those down below in the show notes. So please connect with Charles.
Yeah, I'd love to connect with anyone. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people want to move to France. So I think LinkedIn is a great way to connect with me. I mentioned the French Tech pass, and I think we can put that link. I also mentioned my nonprofit. If you want to learn more about Brittany and the links between Brittany and the USA, I'll put Braze America in there as well. And I work for Appeasy. I'm the CMO there, so I'll add that too.
Ah, fantastic. Yeah. Real quick, what does Appeasy do?
Yeah, so we're a European leader in video communication for customer service. We really try to help people to humanize and personalize their customer service experiences. So one of the big things that we know is often when you have that customer service experience, your customer's not too happy, right? And we add a video element to that. So, might start in a chat or on email or on social media or on a phone call. When you really have a big problem and you want to help them, a complex problem, you add this video element that has augmented reality. And all of a sudden what you're seeing is that customer service is improved because you're helping them. You're not having a technician go to their house to fix their Wi-Fi or their washing machine or whatever that is. So customer satisfaction is boosted up. You help your carbon footprint because you don't have a technician going to the person's house. And that's how you have super loyal customers in the future.
Awesome, man. All being created right there in beautiful Brittany, France. I love it. Thank you, Charles. This was amazing and really, really enjoyed it, man. Hope to see you again in real life soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in today from wherever you are in the world. Once again, I'm Chase, and this has been another episode of About Abroad. For those of you wondering how you can best support the show, I have made it super simple for you. Just go over to the show notes of the episode that you just finished listening to and click on one of the two following links. aboutabroad.com/newsletter to get our monthly newsletter, no spam, guaranteed, or ratethispodcast.com/aboutabroad, where you can quickly and easily leave a review for the show. It's not just important to me, it also helps more wanderers just like you find us. Finally, don't forget to subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, and we will see you again next week. Thanks again. Hasta luego, amigos.